How
Dustin.
great is Nate Diaz? His post-fight interview, he was like, yo, house party at my house.
Hey, we having a fat party at my house tonight. Come through, check out my Instagram.
Dude, I was watching that. I was like, this is the greatest dude of all time.
He's a gangster. When I interviewed him after he chokes out Conor McGregor, he goes, I'm not surprised, motherfuckers.
Hey, I'm not surprised, motherfuckers.
Phenomenal jiu-jitsu guys, got great boxing, tremendous heart, tremendous cardio.
Always willing to exchange.
Nate Diaz is as game as it gets, and he's very dangerous everywhere.
He is such a confident young man.
The lights have dimmed, but he's still swinging. That's the haunting image that surrounds Nate Diaz in this chapter of his life. Not in the cage, not under the roar of Vegas crowds or the deafening chants of Stockton diehards, but out there, in the real world, where punches come in the form of aging, isolation, and irreversible trauma. Nate didn't walk away like a legend. He didn't throw his gloves down or raise a tearful fist to the heavens. He just drifted, and somehow that's more chilling than any knockout. Because when the roar fades and the cage door shuts behind for the final time, most fighters feel the silence, but Nate, he's still living in the echo. He's still fighting ghosts no one else can see. The man who once embodied defiance, flipping off cameras mid-submission, calling out pay gaps while bleeding from the brow, now stumbles through interviews with slurred words and vacant pauses. You watch him speak and feel your stomach tighten, like you're witnessing something sacred slowly decay. He used to be fire, pure Stockton steel, built different, a guy who didn't just fight, he bled to make a point. Every jab, every taunt, every stare down was a declaration. I don't play the game, I am the game. But now that fire flickers, not out, but dangerously close. Fans still cheer when he walks in a room, still chant his name when old highlight reels go viral. But behind that nostalgia lies something darker, concern. You can feel it in comment sections, hear it in the pauses between words on fight podcasts. Something's off. Look closely at his recent interviews. The slow speech, the repeated phrases, the long, eerie silences. This isn't swagger, it's not attitude, it's the toll, paid in full. The kind of cognitive slip that MMA fans have seen before, in the eyes of broken boxers, in the shaky hands of fallen warriors. It's what happens when the fight never ends. Not in the ring, not in the gym, not in your head. Nate's style was never built to last. He wasn't elusive, he wasn't calculating. He was a storm you couldn't stop, only survive. And storms don't age gracefully. They burn out or break. Still, he won't stop. He won't slow down. He's out here chasing boxing paychecks, calling out influencers, shadow boxing in hotel lobbies like he's still 25. But he's not. The chin is still granite, sure, the heart, untouchable, but the timing, the footwork, the sharpness, it's gone, and what's left is something that feels more desperate than dangerous, like a man fighting to stay in a world that's already moved on without him. And maybe that's the scariest part, because Nate doesn't see it, or maybe he does, and just refuses to admit it. That's always been his armor, hasn't it? That unshakable self-belief. The same stubbornness that made him a legend is now dragging him into battles he shouldn't be fighting. The cage used to give him purpose. Now it's a memory he keeps trying to relive, even as his body forgets how. But fans notice. They remember the Nate who danced in blood and smiled through violence. They remember the Nate who choked out the golden boy and flipped off the press. But they also see the Nate now, wandering through press conferences, mumbling about conspiracy, sounding like a man who's stuck in a dream he can't quite explain. And still, they clap, they scream, because to them, he is MMA, the rebel, the warrior, the underdog, and to let go of him would mean letting go of everything he represents. Still, there's something almost cruel in the way it's playing out. Because while fans debate whether he should hang it up, the UFC isn't saying a word. No health checkups, no exit plan, no golden handshake, just silence. The same silence that follows so many retired fighters. The kind that gets louder the longer you ignore it. Nate gave the sport everything, his body, his brain, his identity. But when it came time to protect him from himself, the machine just watched. He's not the first, and tragically, he won't be the last. But what makes Nate's fall feel different is how public it is. You're not reading about it years later in some article. You're watching it. In real time, the slow unraveling, the moments where he forgets what he was saying. The dazed looks in his eyes when the cameras stop rolling. It's like witnessing a warrior walk into battle without realizing his armor's already shattered. And still, he won't stop marching. There's no fairy tale finish here. No championship belt waiting, no epic trilogy that fixes everything. Just a man walking through the fog, still swinging, still chasing that feeling he once knew. And the saddest part, the final bell may have already rung. But Nate Diaz, the warrior who never backed down, never tapped, never let go, he didn't hear it, and maybe he never will, because for Nate, the fight was never just about wins or titles. It was about survival. It was about being real in a world of masks. That's what made him a legend, but it's also what makes his fall so hard to watch. He can't fake it. He can't play politics. He doesn't know how to be anything other than what he's always been, a fighter. And when fighting is all you know, what's left when the fighting's done? That's the unspoken question that hangs over Nate's story like a shadow. It's not about who he beat or how many wars he survived. It's about what those wars took from him. The pieces of himself that got left behind with every punch, every cut, every deafening cheer that told him to keep going, when maybe what he needed most was to stop. But stopping isn't in his blood, and that's why fans watch with a mix of awe and heartbreak, because deep down we know what comes next. We've seen it before, in other fighters in other sports, the tragic third act. The quiet doubt, the irreversible damage, and yet we can't look away, because Nate Diaz didn't just fight for himself. He fought for us, for the underdogs, for the misfits, for everyone who ever got told to sit down and shut up. And that's why it hurts, not because he lost, but because he's still fighting, even when the war is already over, even when his mind is telling him it's time to walk away. But maybe, just maybe, he never learned how. The footage didn't look real. It looked like a scene ripped from a Hollywood fight flick. Except this wasn't a movie. It was Nate Diaz standing in the chaos of a New Orleans street, his hood up, surrounded by shouting and flashing phones, locking a man in a textbook standing guillotine and dropping him limp on the pavement. No octagon, no gloves, no ref to wave it off, just raw instinct and concrete. That clip hit the MMA world like a viral uppercut. At first, fans didn't know what they were watching. Was it a prank, a skit, staged? But the man on the ground, twitching and unconscious, made it clear. This was no act. The victim, who bore an uncanny resemblance to Logan Paul, lay crumpled, motionless, his skull bouncing off the curb like a cautionary tale. And Nate, he just walked away, calm, detached, like it was just another day at the gym. But this wasn't the gym, this was real life. And for the first time, the world saw a version of Nate Diaz that wasn't heroic. It was haunting. The man had spent nearly 2 decades building his legend, fighting killers, flipping off cameras, bleeding for crowds. But in that split second, all of it blurred into something darker. The instinct that once made him a fan favorite now looked like a liability. And suddenly, the myth of Nate Diaz, the rebel, the warrior, the guy who never backed down, started to look less like a symbol of toughness and more like a man lost in his own war. It didn't take long for New Orleans police to react. The clip went viral across every platform: Twitter, Instagram, fight blogs. Headlines exploded. Nate Diaz street fight ends in guillotine KO. UFC legend wanted by police. A warrant was issued for second-degree battery. Nate turned himself in casually, like it was nothing, but the mugshot that said everything, gone was the swagger, gone was the smirk, just a hollow stare, empty eyes, no fight left, only fog. The internet exploded. Some fans tried to defend him. He's always been like this. That guy came at him. It's Nate being Nate. But others couldn't shake what they saw. A man who looked completely disconnected from reality. A fighter who couldn't flip the switch off. A human weapon stuck in combat mode. Even when no one was keeping score. And maybe that's the point. Nate Diaz has always lived by a different code. Stockton tough. No apologies. No filters. No acting. What you saw was what you got. But that kind of authenticity, when mixed with years of head trauma and unchecked aggression, can become something else entirely, something dangerous. Because when you've spent your life treating violence like a language, what happens when you forget how to speak anything else? The tragedy here isn't just what Nate did, it's what it revealed. For years, fans laughed off the slurred speech, the forgetfulness, the dazed interviews. They called it Stockton style. They saw it as part of the myth. But in New Orleans, that myth cracked. The behavior wasn't just eccentric. It looked unhinged. And for many, it raised a terrifying question. Is Nate Diaz okay? Like, actually okay? You could argue this wasn't the first sign. You'd be right. The warning signs were always there, hidden in plain sight. The repetitive speech, the wild post, fight rants, the paranoia about being blackballed or judged. And more recently, the erratic behavior, the aimless callouts, the bizarre energy around press appearances. But this wasn't just another meme-worthy Nate moment. This was a man choking someone unconscious on a public street in broad daylight. That's not rebellion. That's not street justice. That's trauma misfiring in real time. And that trauma has a name: CTE, chronic traumatic encephalopathy, the silent killer of combat sports. It doesn't knock you out. It wears you down. Slowly, invisibly, it clouds your judgment, it's your emotions, blurs the lines between what's real and what's not. And in Nate's case, it might be what pushed a trained fighter to apply a cage technique in the chaos of Bourbon Street. Because here's the uncomfortable truth: Nate Diaz has always been on. Even outside the cage, he's never relaxed, never softened, never dropped the persona. But what if that's not a persona anymore? What if the fighter is the man, and the man can't remember who he was before the fighting started? That's the cost of war, the price of never backing down. And the sport, the fans, the UFK, they all got their money's worth. The blood, the drama, the viral clips. But what's left for Nate now? A legal case, a fading spotlight, and a growing list of people worried he's spiraling into a version of himself that even he doesn't recognize. The New Orleans incident wasn't just a flashpoint. It was a fracture, a glimpse into what happens when the fight doesn't stay in the cage, when the instincts that once made you great become the thing that destroys you. And the scariest part, no one around Nate seems willing or able to stop it. He's not in training camp. He's not preparing for a title run. He's floating, lost somewhere between relevance and recklessness. And that's where things get dangerous, because a fighter with nothing to lose is already risky. But a fighter who doesn't know what he's lost that's a tragedy in motion, and yet you still hear the cheers. Fans still post clips, still scream Diaz Army like it's 2016, but underneath the nostalgia, a darker realization is setting in. This isn't just about a fighter aging out. It's about a warrior who never learned how to live without war. And now, the war is following him into streets, into courts, into moments where there are no opponents, just consequences. No cage, no corner, no ref, just Nate Diaz, standing in the middle of the street, still swinging, still fighting a battle the rest of the world already moved on from. And that's the tragedy. Because when you can't hear the bell, you don't know the fight's over. You just keep punching, keep choking, keep going until something or someone finally makes it stop. It always ends like this for the warriors who give too much. Not with standing ovations, not with legacy speeches or bronze plaques, but with silence. Nate Diaz didn't just fight for the UFC. He bled for it. He made chaos an art form, turned cage fights into movements, sold out pay-per-views without belts, built fan bases without the UFC machine ever pushing him, and transformed trash talk into folklore. And in the end, they gave him nothing but the sound of a closing door. No tribute, no retirement montage, no promise of long-term care, just a quiet exit after 15 years of war. This is the part of the fight game they don't show in highlight reels. The part that lives in shadows. When the money's made, the clips go viral, and the cameras cut. What's left for the fighter, for Nate, it wasn't glory, it wasn't peace, it was exile, and the betrayal wasn't loud. That's what makes it worse. It was systematic, strategic, and silent. For years, Nate was the UFC most bankable chaos agent. He didn't play by the script, and that's exactly why fans loved him. While other fighters polished their media game, Nate barked into mics, threw water bottles, lit up press conferences like they were street fights. And when he fought like it meant something. You felt every punch. You saw the blood, the defiance, the middle fingers in mid-submission. He was Stockton incarnate, a walking warning that this sport wasn't for the faint of heart. And the UFC, they cashed every second of it. When Conor McGregor needed a foil, a wild card, a storyline worth $100 million, Nate Diaz answered the call on short notice. No training camp, no prep. He submitted the face of the franchise in one of the most iconic moments in UFC history. And what did he get? A base purse of $500,000. Conor made $3 million that night, before counting his bonuses, brand deals, or back-end pay-per-view points. Nate carried the narrative. Nate sold the war. Nate won the fight. But when the checks were written, he was treated like a B-side. That wasn't a one-time thing. Nate never got tuned-up fights. No easy walkouts. No ceremonial bouts. While others got title shots and padded records, Nate was thrown into the fire over and over again. Khabib, Tony Ferguson, Jorge Masvidal, Leon Edwards, these weren't warm-ups, these were wars. Each one a test, each one a risk. And the reason? The UFC knew he'd say yes. They knew he'd show up. They knew fans would watch. So they used him. They branded his rage, his rough edges, his refusal to conform. They didn't polish Nate. They profited off the dirt, made millions off his scars, and when he finally spoke out, when he said, "They're using me, I want out," what did Dana White do? He laughed, mocked him in interviews, dismissed him as difficult, talked about how nobody wants to fight Nate. The same Nate who packed arenas, set pay-per-view records, and gave this sport some of its most legendary moments, was now being quietly erased. Not retired, just forgotten, and all the while, the damage was setting in. Not just the broken bones or the battered hands, but the other damage, the invisible kind, the slow kind, the kind that slurs your speech and makes you forget what year it is. CTE doesn't show up with fanfare. It sneaks in, fight by fight, jab by jab, and settles into your brain like a shadow that never leaves. And Nate, He wasn't built to avoid it. He didn't slip punches. He walked through them. That was the brand. That's what the UFC sold. And now, that brand is breaking. Fans can hear it in his voice. The slowed cadence, the jumbled thoughts, the pauses that feel like blackouts. But what's worse than hearing it? Knowing that the organization that built everything around that voice now wants nothing to do with him. Nate Diaz wasn't just a fighter. They made him a product. And like all products, when he started malfunctioning, they shelved him. No Hall of Fame, no commentary desk offer, no behind the scenes role, nothing. The UFC doesn't do farewells. It does replacements, new hype trains, new prospects, new fighters to feed into the machine. And legends like Nate, they get swept under the rug with their bruises and their broken memories. It's not just neglect, it's a silent betrayal, because the UFC didn't just ignore Nate's decline, it enabled it. Fight after fight, clip after clip. They never once stepped in, never once slowed the pace, because slowing down would mean acknowledging the cost. And acknowledging the cost means taking responsibility. But why would they? The business model depends on silence, on legends who don't know when to stop, on fans who cheer louder than they question, on fighters who think walking away is weakness. Nate Diaz was the perfect storm. A rebel who wouldn't say no, a fighter who didn't care about the politics, a name that printed money and never asked for favors. And that's why they ran him into the ground quietly, profitably. And now that he's stumbling through post-fight interviews, getting into street fights, forgetting how to finish sentences, no one's calling, not Dana, not the matchmakers, not the executives who once lined their pockets